You won't believe what happens in today's story. It's one you definitely won't forget. If you love thrilling, eerie, and downright mind-blowing stories, then you're in the right place. My name's Charlie, and welcome to Charlie's Tales, where we bring you 2 spine-chilling stories every Wednesday and every Friday. So, if you're new here, be sure to subscribe, and while you're at it, throw that like button straight into an erupting volcano. Now, let's dive in. The discovery of Stillwater Cave. In the early spring of 2012, 6 experienced cavers from the Appalachian Spelunking Society gathered in eastern Kentucky for what was supposed to be a routine exploration of a newly discovered cave system. The group consisted of Jacob Miller, 34, a geology professor at University of Tennessee, his wife Sarah Miller, 32, an emergency room nurse, brothers Tyler and Craig Dunham, 29 and 31 respectively, both with over a decade of caving experience, Lisa Chen, 27, a graduate student studying subterranean ecosystems, and Michael Watkins, 41, the most experienced of the group, with nearly 25 years of spelunking behind him. These weren't amateur thrill-seekers or unprepared tourists. Each member had extensive training in cave navigation, emergency medicine, and survival techniques. They had mapped dozens of cave systems throughout the Appalachian region, published papers on their findings, and even assisted local rescue teams in extracting lost hikers from dangerous underground situations. They were as prepared as anyone could be for the hazards of subterranean exploration. What they weren't prepared for was what awaited them in the depths of what local residents had ominously nicknamed Stillwater Cave. The cave's entrance had been discovered just 3 months earlier by a local hunter tracking a wounded deer. Hidden behind a stand of dense undergrowth on private property, the narrow opening in the limestone bluff had likely been sealed for decades, possibly centuries, before a recent landslide had exposed it. The property owner, an elderly man named William Harmon, had initially been reluctant to allow exploration, citing old local legends about the hillside being unwelcome ground. But Michael Watkins, charismatic and persuasive, had eventually secured permission with promises of documenting any historical or geological significance the cave might hold. The team arrived at the Harmon property on the morning of March 15th, their vehicles loaded with equipment ropes, harnesses, helmets, multiple light sources, first aid supplies, communication devices, and provisions for what they expected would be a 12-hour preliminary exploration. As they unloaded their gear, William Harmon watched from his porch with visible unease. "William Harmon, you folks be careful in there. My granddaddy used to tell stories about that hillside, said the Native Americans wouldn't go near it, called it the breathing earth in their language." The team acknowledged his warning with polite nods but privately exchanged knowing smiles. They'd heard similar local superstitions about virtually every cave they'd explored. Tyler Dunham even joked about making a bingo card of cave superstitions, mysterious disappearances, strange noises, cursed treasures, and angry spirits. At 8:17 that morning, the 6 explorers entered the narrow opening that led into Stillwater Cave. Jacob Miller went first, followed by Sarah, the Dunham brothers, Lisa, and Michael bringing up the rear. The entrance tunnel was tight, barely 2 feet in diameter, requiring them to crawl on their stomachs for about 30 feet before it widened into a small chamber. The initial passage was typical of the limestone caves common throughout the region. Damp walls, the occasional stalactite, small pools of collected rainwater. Using fluorescent markers, they tagged their route as they pushed deeper, establishing a safety line as they'd done countless times before. Their helmet-mounted lights revealed increasingly impressive formations as they descended. Delicate soda straws hanging from the ceiling, massive flowstone formations cascading down walls like frozen waterfalls, and crystalline structures that glittered like diamonds in their beams. 2 hours into their descent, they reached a significant vertical drop, a shaft approximately 70 feet deep that would require ropes and harnesses to navigate. After securing their lines and performing safety checks, they rappelled down one by one into a vast chamber below. And it was here that they encountered the first indication that Stillwater Cave was unlike any they had explored before. The chamber was enormous, at least 200 feet across, with a ceiling so high their lights couldn't reach it. But what immediately struck them was the unnatural symmetry of the space. Unlike the organic, random beauty of natural cave formations, this chamber was almost perfectly circular, its walls smooth in places, as if carved by tools rather than water and time. Lisa Chen, this doesn't look natural. There's tool marking here. Look at these striations. They're uniform, deliberate. Jacob Miller mining activity, maybe? This region has a history of coal and mineral extraction. Craig Dunham, not like any mining operation I've ever seen. Where are the support beams? The tracks for ore carts? And why carve out a perfectly circular chamber? It's not efficient for resource extraction. As they debated possible explanations, Tyler called them over to what appeared to be an altar-like stone structure in the center of the chamber. Roughly 4 feet high and 6 feet across, the flat-topped formation seemed deliberately shaped. More disturbing were the deep grooves carved into its surface, all leading to a central depression. Sarah Miller, drainage channels, like the ones we saw at that Mesoamerican archaeological site in Mexico. No one needed to elaborate on what such channels were typically used for in ancient ceremonial contexts. Michael, typically the most pragmatic of the group, suggested they document the chamber thoroughly before moving on. As Lisa photographed the unusual features and Jacob took measurements, the others discovered what appeared to be a continuation of the cave system, a perfectly arched passage leading away from the circular chamber. The passage maintained the same unsettling symmetry as the chamber, its dimensions oddly precise, its floor unnaturally level. Unlike the damp, mineral-rich environment they'd traversed earlier, this corridor was strangely dry and devoid of typical cave formations. Their footsteps echoed differently here, creating acoustic patterns that seemed to bounce back at odd intervals, as if the sound waves were being disrupted or distorted. After following this corridor for approximately a quarter mile, they encountered another anomaly. A perfectly square shaft descending into darkness, with ancient stone steps spiraling down its perimeter. The craftsmanship was impressive. Each step uniform in height and depth, the spiral maintaining a mathematically precise curvature. Tyler Dunham. This is insane. We're looking at evidence of advanced stonework dating back God knows how long. This region doesn't have recorded history of any civilization capable of this kind of engineering. Michael consulted the digital mapping device they'd been using to track their path. Michael Watkins. We're about 500 feet below the surface now, and maybe 3/4 of a mile horizontally from the entrance. The signal from our communication relay is still strong, but I don't know how much deeper we can go before we lose contact. After a brief discussion, they decided to continue down the staircase, establishing another safety line and leaving additional markers. The descent was long. Lisa counted 276 steps before they reached the bottom. What awaited them there challenged everything they thought they knew about North American archaeology and natural history. They found themselves in an underground city, or perhaps complex would be more accurate. Dozens of chamber openings lined what appeared to be a central plaza carved from the living rock. Columns supported vaulted ceilings adorned with symbols and pictographs unlike any known indigenous American writing system. Most disturbing were the numerous stone statues arranged throughout the space. Humanoid figures with elongated limbs and oddly proportioned features, their faces carved with expressions that seemed to convey a profound anguish. Jacob Miller. This is impossible. There's no record of any civilization in this region capable of this kind of construction. Nothing in the archaeological record even comes close. As they explored further, they discovered additional chambers branching off from the central plaza. Some appeared to be living quarters, others workshops of some kind. One particularly large room contained what seemed to be astronomical charts carved into the walls and ceiling, star patterns and celestial bodies rendered with mathematical precision, but not matching any known constellation configuration. In another chamber, they found something that finally broke through their scientific detachment and struck them with primal fear. Rows of stone tables, each with restraints carved into the corners, each stained with a dark substance that, despite the passage of what must have been centuries, still retained a rusty, organic hue. Sarah Miller, we need to leave, right now. No one argued. Whatever culture had created this place, whatever purposes these chambers had served, the evidence suggested practices none of them wanted to contemplate further. They began making their way back toward the spiral staircase, moving more quickly now, their earlier excitement replaced by a collective urgency to return to the surface. That's when they noticed the air had changed. When they'd first entered the complex, the atmosphere had been still, dry, and surprisingly fresh for such a deep subterranean space. Now there was movement, a subtle current, like a slow inhalation drawing air deeper into the earth. Along with this current came a sound at the threshold of hearing. Not quite a whisper, not quite a vibration, but something between the two that made their inner ears itch and their teeth feel strange in their gums. At the base of the spiral staircase, Michael suggested they take a final set of measurements and photos before ascending. Despite their unease, scientific habit prevailed, and they spent 10 minutes documenting the entrance to the complex. As Lisa was photographing the unusual symbols carved around the archway, she noticed something troubling. Lisa Chen, these symbols, they're different than they were before. I'm certain that central glyph was a circular design when we came in, now it's more angular. Craig Dunham, that's not possible. Tyler Dunham, neither do shadows. No further discussion was needed. They began ascending the spiral staircase as quickly as safety allowed, no longer stopping to place markers or take readings. About halfway up, Sarah, who was third in line behind her husband and Tyler, let out a sharp cry. Sarah Miller. What the hell was that? Jacob Miller? What happened? Sarah Miller! Something touched me, brushed against my back. I thought it was Craig behind me, but he's 2 people back. Craig Dunham. Nobody's touched you. The air movement they'd noticed earlier had intensified, no longer a gentle current, but a steady flow rushing downward past them into the depths. And the sound, that not quite whisper, had grown louder, occasionally resolving into something that terrifyingly resembled syllables in no language any of them recognized. They abandoned all pretense of careful scientific exploration and raced up the remaining steps, practically climbing over one another in their haste. As they reached the square shaft's upper opening and piled into the corridor beyond, Michael, who had been bringing up the rear, shouted in alarm. Looking back, they saw him frozen on the top step, staring down into the darkness below. Michael Watkins, there's something coming up the stairs. Before anyone could respond, Michael was yanked backward with such force that his safety line snapped taut, jolting Craig, to whom he was tethered. Craig braced himself, gripping his brother's arm for support, but the force pulling Michael was tremendous. For a moment, he hung suspended between whatever had grabbed him from below and his teammates above. Then, with a sickening pop, the carabiner connecting his harness to the safety line broke, and Michael vanished into the darkness with a scream that cut off with unnatural abruptness. The 5 remaining explorers stood in shocked silence for perhaps 3 seconds before years of training kicked in. Tyler Dunham, we go back for him! Jacob Miller, listen! From the shaft came no sounds of falling, no impact, no calls for help. Instead, there was only that persistent, not quite whisper, now punctuated by something like wet, heavy footsteps ascending the stairs at an unnaturally steady rhythm. Jacob Miller, run, now. They ran, abandoning equipment in their haste, keeping only their lights and essential safety gear. The corridor that had taken them perhaps 20 minutes to traverse initially now seemed endless, its perfect arch and symmetrical walls no longer impressive, but oppressive. Behind them, the footsteps continued, maintaining the same measured pace regardless of how quickly they fled. When they finally reached the circular chamber with its altar-like stone, Lisa slipped on the smooth floor, falling hard and twisting her ankle. Sarah and Craig helped her up, but it was immediately obvious she couldn't run. Without hesitation, Jacob and Tyler took positions on either side of her, supporting her weight as they continued forward. The chamber seemed different now. The walls appeared to pulse subtly, as if keeping time with some massive, slow heartbeat. The grooves in the altar stone no longer looked dry and ancient, but glistened wetly in their lamplight. And most disturbing of all, the darkness gathered in the corners of the room seemed deeper, more substantive, occasionally shifting in ways darkness shouldn't move. They reached the vertical shaft they had rappelled down hours earlier and began the ascent, now hampered by Lisa's injury and their growing exhaustion. Sarah went first, establishing a secure position at the top to help haul Lisa up. Craig followed, then Tyler. Jacob prepared the harness for Lisa, working quickly but methodically despite the approaching footsteps. As Lisa began her painful ascent, Jacob turned to face whatever was coming down the corridor. His headlamp illuminated the chamber entrance just as a figure emerged, a figure that, in form, resembled Michael Watkins. But Jacob knew immediately, with a certainty that transcended rational thought, that whatever was wearing his friend's appearance was not Michael. The figure moved with jerky, disjointed motions, as if its limbs were being operated by something unfamiliar with how human bodies worked. Its head was cocked at an impossible angle. And its face, Michael's face, wore an expression of what could only be described as hungry curiosity. Most horrifying of all, it seemed to be changing as it moved. Michael's familiar features subtly elongating, his proportions shifting to more closely resemble the disturbing statues they had seen in the underground complex. Jacob didn't wait to see more. He scrambled up the rope, practically climbing over Lisa in his desperation to escape. From below came a sound, Michael's voice, but wrong somehow. The words stretched and compressed in impossible ways. "Jacob, we found something amazing. You need to see it." The 5 survivors reached the upper passage and didn't stop to catch their breath. With Lisa now on Craig's back, they pushed forward through the increasingly narrow tunnel toward the entrance. The cave that had gradually revealed its wonders on their way in now seemed malevolent, each shadow potentially concealing unknown horrors, each twist in the passage potentially leading them astray. When they finally crawled out of the entrance tunnel into the late afternoon sunlight, they collapsed on the ground, gasping for air, unable to believe they had made it out. It was only after several minutes that they realized William Harmon was standing nearby, watching them with an expression of grim validation. "Only 5 came out," William Harmon remarked, his voice tinged with a somber tone. Jacob Miller, still catching his breath, managed to say, "Michael, something took him." William nodded knowingly. "Cave's been taking folks for generations. Not many, just 1 or 2 every few decades when someone gets curious enough to go looking. That's why it got sealed up back in my granddaddy's time. That's why the stories get passed down. Warnings most folks take as superstition." Sarah Miller, her voice trembling, asked, "What is that place? What the hell did we just experience?" William looked at her, his eyes filled with a mix of fear and understanding. "Don't rightly know what it is. Don't want to know. But whatever built that place isn't from here. And it wakes up hungry every now and again." The formal search for Michael Watkins began the next morning and continued for 2 weeks. When authorities arrived to investigate, they found the cave entrance had collapsed, buried under several tons of rock and dirt that looked, to the untrained eye, like a natural landslide. Ground-penetrating radar revealed no cavities or passages beneath, as if the extensive cave system had never existed. The 5 survivors told consistent stories, but with no body and no accessible cave to investigate, the official conclusion was that Michael had fallen into a deep crevice during a cave collapse. The unusual elements of their experience were attributed to oxygen deprivation, stress, and the psychological trauma of losing their friend. But physical evidence supported parts of their account. The photographs on Lisa's camera showed the circular chamber, the altar stone, and the beginning of the precisely carved corridor, though none of the images from deeper in the complex had survived, corrupted into unreadable digital noise. Soil samples from their clothing contained mineral compositions not typical of the region and trace biological material that defied standard classification. Most convincingly, audio analysis of their helmet camera recordings captured that strange, not quite whisper, revealing patterns that linguists confirmed contained structure consistent with language, though matching no known human tongue. In the months that followed, the 5 survivors struggled to resume their normal lives. Lisa abandoned her graduate studies. The Dunham brothers, once inseparable, rarely spoke, each blaming the other for not doing more to save Michael. Sarah threw herself into her work at the emergency room, while Jacob took an indefinite leave from his teaching position. One by one, they began experiencing similar phenomena: electronic devices malfunctioning in their presence, the persistent feeling of being watched, dreams in which they found themselves back in the underground complex, searching endless chambers for an exit that remained just out of reach. Most disturbing were the occasions when each of them, independently, reported seeing Michael watching them from a distance. From across a crowded street, through a window, at the edge of a parking lot. His proportions always slightly wrong, his movements jerky and unnatural. 6 months after the incident, Tyler Dunham disappeared from his apartment in Knoxville. Police found no signs of forced entry or struggle, but every reflective surface in his home, mirrors, windows, even the glass face of his oven, had been covered with black cloth or paint. His journal, found on his bedside table, contained increasingly paranoid entries about reflections that moved independently of their owners, and shadows that stretched in impossible directions. 4 weeks later, Craig Dunham was admitted to a psychiatric facility after attempting to tunnel into his basement floor with his bare hands, his broken nails and bloodied fingers, evidence of days of frantic digging. He alternated between catatonia and periods of speaking in what medical staff described as glossolalia, though audio recordings, later analyzed by the same linguists who had studied their helmet camera footage, revealed structural similarities to the whispering sounds from the cave. Lisa Chen returned to her family in California, seemingly recovering as she put physical distance between herself and Kentucky. But during a routine video call with Jacob and Sarah, she suddenly went silent, staring past her webcam with an expression of pure terror. The last images transmitted before her connection cut showed a shadow falling across her face, a shadow whose shape matched none of the visible objects in her well-lit room. When local police conducted a welfare check at her parents' request, they found her gone, the back door standing open, and a trail of footprints leading from the house toward the nearby hills. The footprints changed gradually along the trail, beginning as normal human impressions but becoming increasingly distorted. Longer, with odd spacing between toes, before disappearing entirely. Jacob and Sarah Miller, unlike their companions, chose to confront whatever had followed them from the depths. They researched obsessively, consulting anthropologists, archaeologists, linguists, and eventually, when conventional science failed them, occultists and practitioners of various esoteric traditions. They traveled to sites of similar underground complexes around the world, from Derinkuyu in Turkey to Longyu Caves in China, seeking patterns, connections, explanations. 3 years after their experience in Stillwater Cave, they returned to eastern Kentucky, despite a restraining order filed by William Harmon, who wanted nothing more to do with them or their ordeal. What they intended to do at the collapsed cave entrance remains unknown. Local search and rescue teams found their abandoned vehicle near Harmon's property, but no trace of Jacob or Sarah. The legacy of Stillwater Cave is one of mystery and unanswered questions. It remains a place that has left an indelible mark on those who dared to explore its depths. Even today, its influence can be felt, a reminder that some secrets are better left undisturbed. William Harmon, interviewed one final time by authorities, reported hearing the earth breathing again the night the Millers disappeared. He died of natural causes less than a month later, his property passing to distant relatives who promptly sold it to a development company. Today, the hillside that once contained the entrance to Stillwater Cave lies beneath the parking lot of a small strip mall. Store employees occasionally report strange sounds coming through the floor at night, sounds described variously as whispering, distant footsteps, or the slow, rhythmic movement of earth like giant lungs inflating and deflating. Electronic devices malfunction frequently, especially after dark. Security cameras capture occasional glimpses of tall, oddly proportioned figures moving at the edge of their frame, though never clearly enough for identification. Most disturbing are the reports from cleaning staff who work after hours. They describe finding strange symbols drawn in dust that no one remembers accumulating, and disjointed footprints tracked across freshly mopped floors, prints that begin suddenly in mid-stride and disappear just as abruptly. Several have quit after reporting the unsettling sensation of being watched by someone standing just behind them, visible only as a reflection in windows or glass display cases, but vanished when they turn around. The official record states that Michael Watkins died in a caving accident, while 5 other members of his expedition survived. The truth, as understood by the few who have connected the subsequent disappearances and studied the corrupted photographs and audio recordings, is far more disturbing. Whatever ancient entity dwelled in the depths of Stillwater Cave remains there still, sealed beneath tons of rock and concrete, yet somehow reaching outward through means beyond our understanding. Sometimes, in that nebulous territory between conventional science and fringe theory, researchers discuss the possibility that certain places serve as junctions between our reality and something else. Something older, vaster, and governed by laws that make no sense to human minds. They speculate that what we perceive as supernatural phenomena might be comprehensible if viewed through a framework beyond our current understanding. But such theoretical discussions offer little comfort to those familiar with the Stillwater Cave incident and its aftermath. They know that some places in this world were never meant for human exploration, places where the very architecture seems designed to draw visitors deeper, where the darkness doesn't just surround but observes and calculates, where what waits in the depths has infinite patience and an insatiable curiosity, about those who walk under the sun. The 6 members of the Appalachian Spelunking Society found such a place on a spring morning in Kentucky, and though only one of them remained below that day, eventually, in one way or another, the cave claimed them all.